Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's good to see everybody, and I'm so excited to present this lesson for you today. So I'm calling this lesson Art, Poetry, and Nonsense, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But first, I'd like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Miss Richards. I am a visual artist and your art teacher for today. I have a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Fine Arts and Psychology and a Master's of Fine Arts in Metalsmithing. I work across a bunch of different media, so I make sculptures, drawings, objects, painting, jewelry. I really like to create in any form. I have a few favorite things as well. I really like to travel when I have the opportunity. I like to cook, and I also like to learn new things. So right now I'm practicing French, and I'm also learning calligraphy and hand lettering techniques. All right, so before I give you any introduction really on what we're doing for today, the very first thing I'd like you to do is to write down 4 of your favorite words. So I would like you to write down 1 noun, so any person, place, or thing, but just avoid proper nouns for me, please. I don't want to see any names there of people we recognize, anything like that. I'd like a verb, so any sort of action word. I would like an adjective, so a descriptive word, and an adverb, so a word that ends in ly, like funnily, for example, something like that. If you don't have any favorite words, that's okay. Just think of maybe a few of the least common words that you know of, or perhaps the title of your favorite movie. So be appropriate and mindful of your word choices, and now take a couple minutes here to write down some of your favorite words. All right, so I see a few people submitting words here. Thank you for doing that. I'd like to remind you guys, if you wanted to Google chat those words to me, that's perfectly fine. I'll be writing them down here for you. All right, so I see a few here as well. Excellent. Okay, so now let me give you a little bit of background about what activity we'll be doing with all of these words. So we are going to be talking about Dada and Surrealism today. So Dada was a movement, an art movement that was formed in Switzerland in 1916. It was a reaction to the violence of World War I and also to traditional norms and values. So can you guys, can somebody tell me what a traditional norm and value might be in the early 1900s? An example of that? Great, yeah. So something like social conduct. We have specific conservative styles of dress at that time period. A lot of institutions were forming, establishment as well, nuclear families at that time period as well. Excellent. Okay, so Surrealists and Dada were resistant to those traditional norms and values, but they were also resistant to traditional methods of making artwork. So what is a traditional method of making art? Let's say we walk into an art museum. What are some different types of artwork that we would see when we walk in? Great, yeah, so we have oil paintings, perhaps, or a marble sculpture, something like that. Absolutely. Yeah, so Surrealists and Dadaist artists, they didn't stick to one specific medium. They worked across all different types of medium. So they would make poetry, painting, drawing, music, collage. They worked in a variety of different media. And a fun fact for you, Picasso actually invented collage, so they were influenced by his work as well. All right. So, as they broke rules and were resistant to all of these other traditional norms and values, they were also their aim was to break rules made by society in general and in institutions like in poetry. So Dada's sound poetry was much more concerned with the sounds of words than their actual meaning. So often Dada artists would recite a number of poems at the same time, creating a chaos of noise. So what we're going to do now, I have actually compiled a poem based on the words that you guys have given me, and I'm just going to read that for you. And as I'm reading that, think about how the words maybe don't make sense entirely in a sentence. So I tried to keep a consistent sort of sentence structure going. But notice how the sound is much more important than the words themselves. So ordinarily, I would have somebody else volunteer to read this for me because I would be typing this on a slide, but I'm just going to read that today. All right, so cat jumping nicely today. We see orbs running like awesome green, happy books of yellow. Excellent. So we can kind of see how it doesn't quite match reality. It doesn't quite make sense, but the sounds are really interesting as they flow. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Dada and Surrealism now. All right. So I've provided here a few different ways of how art movements develop in time. So art movements are typically influenced by many things in culture, in society, and politics. So I'll be talking a little bit about how Dada and Surrealism were influenced by different political events and by each other also. So in response to political, cultural, and social events, art movements often develop. So Dada, for example, responded specifically to the violence of World War I. They rejected logic and rational thought in favor of creating absurd works. Surrealism, interestingly, was created in response to Dada work. So it built upon the principles of absurdity and rejecting logic and rational thought, and was created as a response. It was also strongly influenced by the psychotherapist Sigmund Freud, who invented free association in the early 1920s. So people would write or draw without really thinking to create drawings directly from their imagination. So with that being said, I'll talk a little bit about how art movements develop in response to other art movements. So for example, Dada was founded in response to a really structured modernism. So right here I have the painting done by Piet Mondrian, which is characterized by really bold primary colors, strong lines, a lot of structure. And I think Dada wanted to kind of go against that structure and that style of composing an image. And then Surrealism, as I spoke about before, was created in response to Dada. And there were two different forms of Surrealism. So there was intentional imagery that incorporated a lot of odd pairings of imagery that worked together, versus the improvised, sort of out of control. And this is where more of abstraction would come into play. So things that we don't quite understand immediately when we see them. Right. So some of the main goals of Dada artwork and main features was that it was playful, it was experimental with material and content. So their main goal was to open up the imagination. They wanted to stay away from typical art materials, and they were against everything. It is said that they are against everything, even Dada. So we could call them contrarian. They're sort of against popular culture, they're against other artists, they're even against themselves, as it's sometimes said. Surrealism, on the other hand, they wanted to delve into the subconscious and dreams as well. So they were also interested in opening up imagination. And they also thought that you could learn about yourselves and about the world by looking inward. So tell me a little bit about what these two movements have in common, and what are some differences. So based off of the past two slides that I just showed everybody, tell me what these movements have in common. Absolutely, yeah. So they're both sort of founded on the principles of wanting to delve into the subconscious, into imagination, and staying away from typical art materials. Great. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I didn't mention that in my PowerPoint, but absolutely they were focused on shock value and sort of pressing the bounds of institutional art making, as we call it. Great job. And some differences. Great. Okay. Some differences would be the time period, the artists, and also the representational value of some of the artwork in surrealism. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through some samples for you guys, because I'm sure you're curious about what surrealist and Dada art looks like, right? So I'll go in and talk about that now. So the first example I have for you here is Jean Arp, or Jean Arp, rather. So he was the first to create biomorphic forms. So that means that there's these forms that sort of relate to the body, but we can't quite tell what they are or what they're supposed to be. And that way they're abstracting what they may represent. So what are some things that we see here? Okay, yep, absolutely. So the title is actually Mountain Naval Anchor's Table. And we can kind of get a sense for that imagery in this picture, but it's not necessarily clearly defined for us. Great. Okay, we have a Jean Murel. I'm just going to move quickly through some of these pieces here. We could talk a little bit about abstraction later on, but I would really like to get into the project with everybody. So I'll move forward through these. Oh, we have a Salvador Dali piece. Oh, I see a lot of you have already heard of Dali before. Absolutely. Persistence of memory. Can I just ask one question here? Can somebody tell me why this would be considered a surrealist piece of art? What makes this painting surrealist? Great, well said. Absolutely. So we have some recognizable elements of reality in the background there. We see the mountain, we see a horizon line, we see sort of a basic landscape in the background. And what makes it surrealist is that there are things happening in this picture that we can't quite attribute to reality. So we have melting clocks, we have a figure in the foreground that we don't really understand. We have a few different elements here that blend together, that juxtapose surreality and reality together. And that's what makes this a surrealist piece. Great. All right, let us move on a little bit here. So I would like you guys to focus here on this piece by Max Ernst. So this is using a technique that we'll be talking about and working on in our class. So Max Ernst would take thin pieces of paper and cover textured objects and kind of rub them with the graphite to create an image. And then he would look at those images and he would delve into the subconscious and he would create these line drawings on top to make something that sort of blends something from our subconscious into something a little bit more realistic. So that piece there that I just drew a circle around, this piece right here, keep that in mind as I talk a little bit about the upcoming project that we'll be doing. All right, before I talk about the project, I would like everybody to take just a minute to write down 2 or 3 sentences about how our poem relates to Dada and Surrealist goals. Okay, and we will discuss those a little bit later. I just want to cover our project first, just so that we know what we're doing here. All right, time to talk about the project. So what you will need a paper and a pencil. So just one piece of paper is fine, and any pencil is okay. A number 2 pencil would work pretty well, any of these like standard pencils here. We are going to be working on a project using texture rubbings and automatic line drawings. So very much like Ernst. So step 1, you are going to find an interesting texture. It is said that Max Ernst actually sometimes used bread to create his images, which I think is a pretty interesting point about Ernst and the work that he made. Just an interesting fact there. So you're going to find a texture. You're going to cover the surface with the paper, and you're going to rub very lightly at first, just so that the texture shows through. You don't want to rub too hard or it might break down the texture underneath. After that, you're going to make a line drawing using that texture. All right, so let me actually go back so that we can take a look at, There we are. So we're just going to use this as an example here. So you want to make the texture and then do a line drawing on top of that. All right, so you guys will have the rest of this class period to work on that assignment, and we will be talking a little bit more about progress and the rubric that I'll be giving out later. All right, thank you guys so much for participating. I hope you all had fun and enjoy working on your projects.